Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome from wherever you are listening to us from today. Welcome to the Coaching Cafe. My name is Paula Jones Hunt, and I'm joined today by the lovely Bridget Calvert. Welcome, Bridget.
Thank you, Paula. Lovely to be here with you.
Excellent. So today our session, we're continuing our session in regards to the theme in regards to mental health in the workplace. And today we're going to have a look at overcoming barriers to mental health conversations, because we know that there's difficulties in having mental health conversations. And as coaches, what often happens is a coaching session may start as a coaching session, but we notice something in that coaching session that means that we need to think about it from a mental health perspective. We welcome everyone from wherever they're dialing in from today, or you might be listening to us on your favourite streaming service. Welcome. We have done the weather report for this week. We've got people joining us from KL, we've got California, um, we've got people from the US, from Canada, all over the world, and we welcome you all. We've had a question around um, ICFCCEs, and they will be available for you at the end of the session. And we recommend that you take a screenshot of that and then save that somewhere, uh, save that somewhere safe. As we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today and their continuing connection to the land, waters, and communities of Australia and the lands from all around the world upon which you might be joining us. And we pay our respects to them and their elders past, present, and emerging, and elders from Indigenous communities from around the world. We've just had Hong Kong join us. So we are quite global in our reach.
And I might just add to there, Mary's put in a question in regard to printing out and adding her name to the CEU certificate in order to claim the credit. I don't believe you need to do that, Mary. I think just save them in a folder. Would you agree, Paula? Just save all the screenshots in a folder and that should be
Yeah,
fine.
should be fine. Correct. Thank you, Bridget. All right, so our agenda for today, as I mentioned, we're continuing our journey around mental health, and sorry, excuse me, someone has just put in case you're getting an echo, some suggestions for you. So today we're going to focus on mental health, and we're going to talk about what makes mental health conversations hard or more difficult. We're going to look at how we can remove those barriers. We're looking at what the role of the coach is in the mental health conversations. As always, it's all about creating a shared learning experience. So we love to hear from people, and if you've got questions, please pop them in the chat. Um, we like to have thought-provoking conversations, and as we've talked about at the end, you will have access to the certificate if you are here for the ICF CCEs. So we actually do those once the recording has stopped. All right, are you ready, Bridget? Shall we keep going?
Absolutely, Paula. Sure, I'm ready.
Excellent. So, before we would begin, we will be speaking about mental health in the workplace, and you or someone you know may have a lived experience with mental health. And for some participants, you may find that the content is confronting or it may cause distress. If that happens for you, then please reach out. You can contact, so in Australia, we've got organisations such as Lifeline, Beyond Blue, that you can reach out and have a conversation. Or you can contact 000 or your emergency services in the country that you are in. So if there is something that comes up for you, then we do highly recommend that you talk to somebody, and you can find someone local in the area for you. Okay, so we talked about this last week, and it was a definition of the World Health Organization has defined mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes their own ability, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So when we're talking about someone who has a mental health concern or an illness, it's the opposite of that. It means that they're not realizing their own ability. They're not coping with the normal stresses of life. They're not working productively and fruitfully, and they're not able to make a contribution to their community. And it may be one of those areas, or it might be all of those areas. But what we're saying is there's an impact to that person, and they're not living the best life that they could live. So, when we think about the barriers to mental health, we're thinking about what makes these types of conversations difficult for people. And I've actually broken this into two for this. One is, what are the barriers for the individual? So, what makes having a mental health conversation really difficult? And first, we start with stigma and fear of judgment, and not wanting to seem weak or less than. So sometimes the person will be worrying about how they'll be seen, that they're not able to manage the pressure, they're not coping, they're not performing at the level that they need to. And there is a lot of stigma around a mental health concern. And I think it's getting better. And I think as in workplaces, it's getting better, and we're acknowledging that it is an illness. And I like to think of it, if you had a broken arm, then people would recognize that broken arm and make adjustments for you. So this is about, if you've got a mental illness, how do we make an adjustment for the person with the mental illness? So I think the word in here is illness. So if we recognize it as an illness, how do we help someone and support them with that illness, regardless of whether it's physical or mental? But there's still stigma out there, fear of, if I say something at work, what might happen. And I've got fear of career or reputational impact here. So it's this, how might this affect my credibility, or how I might be progressing? So that stigma, not feeling like that you're less than because you have this illness, and that reputational impact. Bridget, how are you seeing that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think, if people are seeing it as, poor performance, or feeling like they have to somehow lift, shift, change, or raise their performance, and they're equating that to this particular focus, then yes, it's understandable why that would be a barrier or an obstacle for individuals to not want to open up and not want to speak up. So I think normalizing it and creating that culture around that it's okay to speak up, and that's really key here, I think.
Yeah, and there are some cultures for whom that stigma, there's a disbelief around mental illness, and there's some religions and some cultures and some members of communities, for example, that makes it harder for the person. And so I think you're right, Bridget. It's about us making it, to normalize it and to talk about it, and to let them know that there's someone that they can talk to about it.
Mm.
And some of those other barriers are concern about confidentiality, particularly in organizations. So if you are an internal coach working for an organization, someone might be concerned about the confidentiality of the conversation that they're having. And we know that in the coaching conversation that confidentiality is key, and we need to set up those boundaries when we set up coaching arrangements. But when you're thinking about the person who has the illness, that maybe they don't necessarily know all of that information, and they're worried that if they tell the coach, then the coach will have to report that back to the organization. So it's a legitimate concern for the person. And then uncertainty about what happens after the disclosure. So concern about it being confidential, but also, if I disclose something to the coach, what does that then mean, and what will they do with that information? And not knowing if they've said something, what will happen next. So there's the two pieces to that.
Well, of course, and there's also the fact that, things are confidential, of course, unless someone raises something that becomes, if the coach believes that person is at risk of harming self or others, then yes, there will need to be some sort of communication passed on.
Yeah, correct. And if they don't, if the coachee doesn't know that, then part of our role is to let them know about in that it is a confidential conversation unless there is a concern for safety. And in a concern for safety, we have a duty of care to follow to make sure that that person stays safe.
Exactly. And it's not about poor performance. It's not about reporting, that is as a fact. It's about that genuine care and that offer of support when things aren't quite going to plan.
Yeah. Um, And we've Ajmal has said it's important to know that you may not be able to provide solutions to the individual's illness, rather just listen, empathize with them, and advise of the support options. And it is really important to know in this coaching space is that this isn't something for us to solve. I mean, in all coaching, it's up to the individual to come up with their path forward, but particularly from a mental health space, it is about providing that someone for them to talk to and to listen from a non-judgmental perspective and to help them figure out what that next step might be. And Mary added the coaching agreement or contract may make that stipulation too, and it should make that stipulation around the confidentiality, but if there is a concern for safety, that the duty of care steps in at that point.
And I think on Ajmal's point there too, it's important to reflect on the ICF core competencies as well. So when you're thinking about some of those competencies, such as competency 4, which is around cultivating trust and safety, competency 5 around maintaining presence, and competency 6 around listening actively, all of those core competencies contribute to these sorts of situations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, One of the other barriers is someone may not know what supports are available if they've not looked into it, and there are lots of supports that are available. The GP is a really great option. EAP, so employee assistance programs in organisations, psychologists. As we talked about at the beginning, there's Lifeline and Beyond Blue. There are lots of supports that are available, but someone might not know what they are. So they may think that they shouldn't disclose, or they don't want to talk about it because they're not sure about what those supports are. They may also find it difficult to find the words. It might be the first time they've said it out loud. They might not know or recognize fully what's going on for them. So sometimes can be hard to explain what's happening. And that's where I think that in the coaching space, being able to provide that space where it's okay if you say it and it's not right. It's okay if you just, it doesn't have to be a perfect way of saying it. It just needs to be what you're feeling at that point in time. And so some of those feeling and thinking questions that we ask a coach as coaches can really help bring that out for someone. One of the other barriers is normalizing high stress as part of a job. Sometimes that's ongoing pressure can be dismissed as just part of the work, or if I can't manage this pressure, then I can't do my job. And sometimes it's remembering that high stress shouldn't be all the time as well. There should we as humans we need some stress in our life, but it's that extended stress when it's more than we can cope with. And one of the other ones is previous support was unhelpful. So past experiences may make it harder to seek help again. And sometimes someone went to a GP or they went to see a psychologist and it wasn't the right psychologist for them. So then they say, oh, well, I've tried to get help and it didn't work for me. And the analogy that I've used previously is if you went to a hairdresser and you got a really bad haircut, what would you do? Do you stop going to the hairdresser? Or do you go and find a different hairdresser who understands your needs better? And
Mm.
it's the same in this space. There are lots of different types of therapy. There's lots of different group support that you can get. And sometimes it's about finding the one that works best for you. Sebastian said, who decides what's normal, what is a normal stressor versus a high stressor in a job? It can be hard for a coach to assess unless they have a deep understanding of the work context. And this is an important question with the new psychological hazard legislation in Australia. And I agree with you on this. And I think using the term normal is a hard one because what we know is that everything is individualized to a person. And some people can work at a higher stress level than other people. And there's a whole range of things for that. It's about how is that stress feeling for that person and what impact is that stress having on that individual. So if it's having prolonged impact on someone, and when we talked about mental health last week, it's about that 2 week. If it's more than 2 weeks that that person is feeling that they're not in a good mental health zone, that's when that's starting to impact.
Mm. And just remembering too, just in regard to hard for the coach to assess, that's very true. And also, Sebastian, just remembering too that we're approaching that conversation with curiosity, so that we're asking the question rather than making the assessment for ourselves, but really being open to those. To curiosity and asking the person how they're feeling about something and really exploring that for them.
And we're not making diagnosis. So that assessment piece is checking in with the person and understanding that what's their assessment of how they're feeling at this point in time. So, what makes these conversations hard for coaches? So, what are the barriers for coaches? And these are some of the things that we've heard from people around what makes it more difficult. And there's a lot of fear about worried you'll say the wrong thing. So, fear of making the situation worse. So, what if I ask a question or say something in the wrong way? Will that impact the person more? And one of the things here is that often what with a mental health concern wants is someone to notice that something is different for them and to provide a space for them to have a conversation. And in that coaching space, asking the great questions is a great place to start. And you won't and don't worry that you've said the wrong thing. I actually think offering an opportunity and noticing is what the person needs rather than were these words the best or the correct words that they needed.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think too, when we think about cultivating trust and safety as a coach, and we think about the definition of that, we're really partnering with that person to create that safe and supportive environment so that the person can share freely. So we're sort of maintaining a relationship that's based on that mutual respect and trust.
Yeah, and so for the barriers for coaches might be unclear about the scope, so not knowing what is in scope and what's out of scope, and that's really about making sure you understand the difference between the modalities of coach, counselor, um, and advisor so that you are staying in that coaching scope and knowing when if the conversation gets to a point sometimes you do have to come out of scope because you are concerned for that person. Confidentiality concerns, uncertainty about what can stay private and what needs to be shared, unsure of the right or the next step. So, not knowing when to continue, when to pause, when to refer to another service or to escalate can be a barrier for coaches. It's that, am I doing the right thing? What's the right approach for me to take at this point?
Mm.
Concern about strong reactions, so worried about tears, distress, silence, or not knowing how to respond. And that can be difficult for a coach if you've got someone who has a strong reaction and how you're feeling in that conversation. That fear of getting it wrong, concern about missing something important or maybe overreacting. So you ask, is there if everything's okay, and the they're worried that if they ask that question and that person is okay, that then think maybe I'm not okay because this person's asking me that question. Am I okay? Balancing support and boundaries. So wanting to help without taking on responsibility or fixing the issue. And sometimes there's a fatigue. So often for coaches, there's a fatigue that comes in because people do bring to their coaching sessions things that are happening, and that support fatigue, particularly for internal coaches, can be it can feel overwhelming for the coach. And then limited knowledge of support pathways. So if the coach doesn't know what pathways are available, or knowing what to suggest, or what is available, that can also be a barrier for the coach.
Mm.
So there's lots of reasons not to have the conversation or what makes it difficult. But for me, the number one thing as to why I would have the conversation is it's about that person. And in coaching, our focus is all about what is best for the coachee and helping them to discover things for themselves. So when I'm thinking about it, I go to that space that says, I want this person to be the best person that they can be. And if I ask them that question, it might be able to help them move forward with that.
And certainly I would add to that, as a backup, just to, familiarize yourself with those core competencies around the, 4, 5, and 6, because they do allow you to really embody or take on those elements of a coach that support this exact thing.
Yeah, and um, for some of these things, you can go. So, for example, limited knowledge of support and pathways, you can absolutely go and find that information so that if you need it, you've got it close at hand. If you're not sure about the scope or knowing how to move, or at what point to pause or refer or to escalate, then you can go back to those core competencies and have a look at them and make yourself familiar with it so that you do feel more comfortable with that. And yes, the staying curious, which Mary's pointed out as well, is that stay curious, stay asking questions, help explore with the coachee,
Mm.
so that it still stays in that coaching space for them.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about creating a culture that helps to reduce those barriers, from an organizational perspective, we're looking at leadership support. So leaders set the tone, role modeling openness and prioritizing mental health and well-being. And in Australia, the psychological hazard legislation that has come through really sits in this space and sort of forces the hand really to say leaders need to be understanding mental health and they need to be creating workplaces where people feel safe to communicate and feel safe to raise issues. So that leadership support is really important.
Mm.
Role clarity. So clear expectations about roles, responsibilities, and how support conversations fit into that role. So who needs to have these conversations, and anybody can have the conversations, but knowing what that role looks like, what and how support conversations work in there. Skills and confidence. Equip people with the skills, knowledge, and confidence to have supportive conversations. So, upskilling people in mental health, upskilling people in how to have great conversations is key. Empathy and respect, a culture of kindness, respect, and psychological safety encourages people to speak up and be heard. And to make it, as leaders, as individuals, being a space where people can come and have those conversations. And we talked about the normalizing conversation. So, talking about mental health openly and often so it becomes part of a normal workplace conversations. And you can take the analogies that we've used around um, thinking about it as illness rather than a physical illness and a mental illness. And even the one around the hairdresser, which I use a lot because we're prepared to switch hairdressers, but one thing doesn't work for us in our mental health and we cut it out. We want to encourage people to try and find what works for them. And then time and privacy. So provide the time, space, and confidentiality needed for meaningful conversations. This is about thinking about where am I having that conversation? What's the right space for this? When's the right time? Do we need to go for a walk? Do we need to go and grab a coffee? Not having the conversations in open planned areas where everybody can hear. So just thinking about what will work best for the person.
Mm. And I think I just reiterate the point about those competencies as coaches, thinking about cultivating trust and safety and making sure that we're seeking to understand that person and their context and their identity, making sure that we're demonstrating respect for that person, thinking about maintaining presence and sort of really remaining open and observant to what's going on for that person and being responsive to them when needed. So we're demonstrating that sense of curiosity, of course, when we're having that conversation as well, and being able to manage our own emotions to stay present with them as well, and demonstrating that confidence in working with potentially strong emotions as well, all part of those competencies. So the more we're familiar with them, the more we're able to embody them and understand that it's part of that coaching role.
Absolutely. And our role as coaches in breaking down those barriers is around noticing observable changes. That was a hard one to say, Bridget. It's about noticing those changes and checking in with that and checking in and asking permission to check in from a coaching perspective, really important. And then listening with openness and without judgment, which we do as coaches, but it's just reminding ourselves around that and staying with observation, not interpretation. So it's what are we observing as opposed to what are we assuming that means or what are we making that mean, or and definitely no diagnosis in here, not our role. Exploring support and options, encouraging next steps, which we would do in our way forward with the grow, and then checking in and following up. The one other thing that I want to add in here for coaches is that you also need to, if you've had a challenging coaching conversation or a mental health conversation, is please seek support for yourself as well. So if that means that you need to check in with another coach and just have a debriefing conversation, or however it is that you find joy. So it could be sitting in the sun for a little bit. It could be going and getting yourself a cup of coffee. But sometimes you also need to make sure that, not sometimes, you need to make sure that you are also looking after yourself after these conversations. And it's a really important point is making sure that you look after yourself as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, it looks like we have come to the end, and you'll notice that I could probably talk about this
Yeah.
all day, every day, because I think it's really important. And the better we are at coaches as being able to recognize the barriers and help that person find a path forward for themselves that will work for them, and support them to get to seek help. We know that as soon as someone seeks help, the more likely they are to overcome or start managing what's going on for them. And that's what we want people to be doing. Um, so, breaking down those barriers, helping people have these conversations, normalizing the conversations, uh, and and just providing that space for someone to have to be able to say out loud what they might not have said is really important.
Mm.
Anything you'd like to add, Bridget, at the end here?
No, thank you, Paula. I think that you've made that really clear. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Great. So, as always, we've got our certificate for in workplace and business coaching, our diploma in leadership coaching. And just so you know, Bridget delivers both of those programs for us. So, if you're interested, click on the QR code and see what we've got available for everybody. Sebastian said he'd encourage anyone in coaching to do the mental health first aid training. And I would encourage you to. In fact, I facilitate the mental health first aid program. It's a great program for coaches. It really gets you to understand the different mental health concerns, So thank you, Sebastian. I agree. And please, if you have an opportunity, it's worthwhile doing. Well, I wish everybody a really lovely weekend. Thank you for joining us on Friday. We've loved having you. And if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.